I'm Hannah, a 34-year-old biomedical engineer who devoted 7 years to Meditech innovations. I pioneered breakthrough medical devices that generated millions in revenue, yet last month my boss slashed my salary from $115,000 to $72,000 for supposed budget reasons. The conference room fell silent as they delivered the news, clearly expecting me to accept it helplessly. They thought I was trapped, but they had no idea I held all the cards in my patent portfolio. Before I reveal how I turned the tables on my greedy boss, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you've ever been undervalued at work. My journey into biomedical engineering wasn't paved with privilege. Growing up in a small town in Pennsylvania, I was the daughter of a high school science teacher and a nurse who instilled in me a deep curiosity about how things worked, especially the human body. Our modest income meant Ivy League schools were out of reach, but I earned a full scholarship to the state university based on my perfect GPA and science fair achievements. College was where I truly flourished. While other students struggled with advanced biomechanics and organic chemistry, I found myself helping professors with research projects as an undergraduate. My senior thesis on microporous membrane technology for drug delivery systems won national recognition, opening doors that might otherwise have remained closed to someone from my background. After graduating summa cum laude, I accepted a position at Cleveland Medical Center for my internship and residency program. The pay was minimal, but the experience was invaluable. I worked directly with surgeons and patients, witnessing firsthand the limitations of existing medical devices. Each time a surgeon complained about an instrument's design or a patient struggled with a prosthetic, I mentally cataloged the problems, already envisioning solutions. 3 years into my hospital work, I attended a medical innovation conference where I met Richard Blackwell, the charismatic CEO of Meditech Innovations. After hearing my ideas about improving vascular stent designs, he offered me a position on the spot. "We need fresh thinkers like you," Richard said, his firm handshake and direct eye contact conveying confidence in my abilities. Someone who understands both the science and the real-world application. Meditech seemed like a dream workplace when I first arrived. Located in a gleaming glass building in Boston's Innovation District, the company presented itself as the perfect blend of cutting-edge science and compassionate healthcare. The research labs were state-of-the-art, and the company culture initially emphasized collaboration and creativity. My direct supervisor, Dr. Melissa Chen, was brilliant and supportive. With a background in both medicine and engineering, she understood the challenges of translating theoretical concepts into practical devices. Under her guidance, I flourished quickly, advancing from research scientist to project leader within 2 years. "You have a unique ability to see both the forest and the trees," she told me during my second performance review. "You understand the technical details while never losing sight of the patient who will ultimately benefit." My first major breakthrough came with the development of the Neuropulse, a miniaturized nerve stimulation device that provided targeted pain relief without medication. The innovation lay in its size and precision. Previous devices were bulky and affected surrounding tissues, causing side effects. Mine was barely larger than a grain of rice and could be implanted with minimal invasiveness. The Neuropulse exceeded all sales projections, generating $38 million in its first year alone. Richard personally congratulated me at the company holiday party, announcing to everyone that I represented the future of Meditech. My team expanded, my salary increased to $90,000, and I was given more autonomy to pursue promising research directions. Over the next few years, I developed 3 more successful devices: the CardioFlow stent system, the OsteoFusion bone repair matrix, and the HemoGuard blood filtration technology. Each one solved persistent problems in medical treatment, and each one generated significant revenue for the company. By my 5th year, my innovations accounted for nearly 40% of Meditech's annual profits. My salary had reached $115,000, respectable though still below industry standards for someone whose work generated so much revenue, but I wasn't primarily motivated by money. I took pride in creating devices that improved patients' lives, and I valued the creative freedom Meditech afforded me. Then came the changes. Subtle at first, then increasingly obvious. It began with the arrival of Bradley Cooper, the new chief financial officer, hired from a major pharmaceutical company known for aggressive cost-cutting. Bradley was everything. Richard wasn't cold analytical, focused exclusively on bottom-line metrics rather than innovation or patient outcomes. Research and development is a cost center, not a profit center. I overheard him telling Richard during a meeting I wasn't meant to witness. We need to rationalize expenditure and maximize return on existing intellectual property. The company culture shifted gradually. Quarterly earnings calls became the new religion. Research budgets tightened. The emphasis moved from developing groundbreaking new technologies to making incremental improvements to existing products cheaper, to produce faster, to market higher profit margins. Throughout these changes, I continued my work adapting to the new constraints while maintaining my standards. What my colleagues didn't know was that I had been quietly protecting myself for years. From my very first days at Meditech, I had maintained detailed records of all my work, when inspiration struck, where I was, when key innovations occurred, which aspects were developed on company time versus during my evenings and weekends. Having grown up watching my father, an amateur inventor, lose control of his ideas to corporations, I had developed a healthy skepticism about intellectual property rights. I also carefully reviewed my employment contract before signing, noting the specific language around intellectual property. Like many contracts, it claimed ownership of innovations developed using company resources or during work hours. But it also contained a standard clause acknowledging that independent research conducted outside company time remained the property of the employee. A clause I suspected few of my colleagues had noticed or understood the implications of. This foresight would prove invaluable sooner than I expected. The first warning signs appeared in the spring, when Dr. Chen's request for additional research equipment was denied without explanation. Previously routine approvals now required multiple justifications and often remained pending for weeks. Team-building events and conference travel were canceled. The coffee in the break room switched from a local artisanal roaster to generic bulk beans, a small change that symbolized the larger shift. Whispers about budget constraints circulated through the labs and hallways, despite Meditech's stock price reaching an all-time high. The cognitive dissonance was striking. Public announcements celebrated record profits, while internal communications emphasized the need for fiscal responsibility and operational efficiency. During our monthly department meeting, Richard assured everyone that while some belt-tightening was necessary, the company remained committed to innovation. Research and development is the lifeblood of Meditech, he proclaimed with his characteristic confidence. We would never compromise our investment in the future. 3 days later, Dr. Chen called me into her office, closing the door carefully behind me, something she rarely did. "Hannah, I wanted to warn you," she said, her voice lowered. "Bradley has been reviewing compensation packages across all departments. He's particularly focused on R&D. Are layoffs coming?" I asked, thinking of my team. "Not exactly, but there's talk of significant salary adjustments." She hesitated. "Your name came up specifically because of your recent raise." The raise she referred to, a 15% increase, approved 6 months earlier, had come after the remarkable success of my HemoGuard filtration system, which had revolutionized dialysis treatments and generated over $60 million in its first 2 quarters. "They can't seriously be considering cutting my salary," I said, disbelief evident in my voice. "My innovations have generated more revenue than any other researcher in the company's history." Dr. Chen's expression confirmed my fears. "I fought for you in the meeting, Hannah. I showed them the revenue projections for your current projects. But Bradley seems determined. And Richard," she trailed off. "Richard what?" "He's different now. The Richard who recruited you would never have considered this. But he's under pressure from the board, and Bradley has his ear." I left Dr. Chen's office troubled, but still hopeful that rational business sense would prevail. Surely they wouldn't risk alienating the creator of their most profitable products. 1 week later, I received a calendar invitation for a meeting with Richard and Bradley. The subject line simply read, Compensation Review. The meeting was scheduled for 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, timing that immediately struck me as strategic. End of the week when people are tired and less likely to react strongly. Late enough that most colleagues would have left for the weekend, limiting the potential for immediate conversation with peers. I spent the intervening days reviewing my recent achievements and contributions to build my case for maintaining my salary. I compiled data on comparable positions in the industry statistics on the revenue generated by my innovations and projections for my current projects. When Friday arrived, I entered Richard's corner office, armed with facts and figures. The space had changed since my early days at Meditech. Once filled with prototypes of medical devices and academic publications, it now featured financial charts and framed stock certificates. Richard sat behind his imposing desk, Bradley beside him with a laptop open and a spreadsheet displayed. "Hannah, thank you for coming." Richard began his smile, not reaching his eyes. "I know you're busy with the Microvasc project." I nodded, noting that he referred to my groundbreaking microvascular repair system, potentially the most significant innovation yet, as merely the project. As you know, Meditech is implementing strategic adjustments to ensure long-term sustainability in a challenging market environment. Bradley interjected his corporate jargon, immediately setting my teeth on edge. "I understand the industry faces challenges," I replied carefully. "But Meditech just reported record earnings last quarter, largely driven by products my team developed." A flash of annoyance crossed Bradley's face before his professional mask returned. "Yes, historical performance has been strong. However, we must position ourselves for future market conditions." Richard cleared his throat. "Hannah, you've been a valuable contributor to Meditech, and we appreciate your work. But we've had to make difficult decisions across all departments." The conversation continued in this vein for several minutes, vague references to market pressures and company-wide sacrifices without specific examples. Finally, Bradley turned his laptop toward me, displaying a spreadsheet with salary figures. "We're adjusting your compensation package to $72,000 annually, effective next pay period," he stated flatly. I stared at the number, momentarily unable to process what I was seeing. A 37% reduction. More than $40,000 gone. "This is a joke, right?" The words escaped before I could formulate a more professional response. "I assure you, this is not a matter we take lightly," Bradley replied. "All departments are facing similar adjustments." "All departments? Or all female department heads?" I asked, having noticed a pattern in the recent changes. Richard shifted uncomfortably. "Hannah, this isn't about gender. It's strictly business. Everyone needs to tighten their belts in this economy." "Then, you won't mind sharing the complete list of salary adjustments?" I countered. "For transparency." "That would be confidential personnel information," Bradley interjected quickly. The meeting continued with me, presenting my carefully prepared data, the millions in revenue my innovations had generated, the industry standards for compensation, the ongoing value of my current projects. Throughout my presentation, Bradley checked his watch repeatedly, while Richard maintained his practiced expression of concerned listening. When I finished, Richard sighed deeply, as if pained by the situation. "Your contributions are valued, Hannah, but this decision is final. The new compensation package includes your existing benefits and represents Meditech's continued investment in your work." As if a nearly 40% pay cut could be framed as an investment in me. "I'd like time to consider my options," I said, finally gathering my materials. Of course, Richard nodded. "But I should mention that we'll need your decision by Monday, for payroll processing purposes." The short timeline confirmed my suspicions about their strategy. They expected me to react emotionally, then capitulate over the weekend when I realized I had few alternatives. Walking back to my lab, I passed Jake Thornton's office, my male counterpart, who led the cardiovascular division. Through the glass wall, I could see him laughing with colleagues, apparently unconcerned about any belt tightening. A quick conversation with his assistant later that day confirmed my suspicions. No salary adjustment had been mentioned for his department. That evening, I called Dr. Chen from my car, unable to wait until Monday to discuss what had happened. 37%, I told her, my voice shaking with anger rather than tears. They cut my salary by 37%, while claiming it's happening across the board. Her long pause spoke volumes. It's not across the board, Hannah. My salary was reduced by 28%. Janet, in neurological research, lost 30%. But from what I've heard, none of the male department heads have received similar cuts. That's discrimination. We could file a complaint. We could, she agreed, and spend years in litigation while being labeled troublemakers in the industry. Or what? Or we could recognize that Meditech has changed. Richard isn't the mentor he presented himself as. The company isn't the innovation leader it claims to be. Maybe it's time to consider other options. That night, unable to sleep, I called my father. A retired attorney who had specialized in intellectual property law before health issues forced his early retirement, he had always been my most trusted advisor. They're counting on your specialized knowledge, making you dependent on them, he said, after hearing the situation. But what if you have more leverage than they realize? Tell me about your patents and intellectual property at Meditech. And that's when I began to see the situation from an entirely different angle. My father's question triggered a cascade of realizations. Over 7 years at Meditech, I had created numerous innovations, but I had always been meticulous about documenting when and where inspiration struck and development occurred. Remember when you were 10 and created that science fair project in our garage? My father reminded me. The school tried claiming ownership because you used some of their equipment, but I'd documented every component you built at home. That's when I taught you about intellectual property rights. The lesson had stuck. Throughout my career at Meditech, I had maintained 2 separate notebooks. One documented all work performed in the company labs during official hours. This unquestionably belonged to Meditech under my employment agreement. But the second notebook, kept at home, recorded all concepts developed during evenings, weekends, and vacations, often spawned by observations made in my personal time. That night, I retrieved a fireproof lockbox from my closet containing these private notebooks, along with copies of all patent applications I had filed independently. Flipping through the pages, I rediscovered detailed sketches, calculations, and notes clearly time-stamped and dated from my non-working hours. 3 years earlier, concerned about protecting my independent work, I had consulted Patricia Winters, a patent attorney, specializing in biomedical innovations. With her guidance, I had filed for patents on several key technologies developed during my personal time, patents filed in my name, not Meditech's. The company remained unaware of these filings because they related to aspects of medical technology that weren't part of Meditech's immediate product pipeline, but represented significant future potential. More importantly, I had carefully ensured these innovations were developed using my own resources on my own time. My employment contract, like most in the industry, contained standard language, claiming ownership of innovations developed using company resources or during work hours. But it also acknowledged in Section 12.3, Paragraph 4, a clause few employees, likely read carefully, that independent research conducted outside company time and without company resources remains the intellectual property of the 425 Milorch 2 employee. This clause, common in research-based industries, was intended to allow employees to pursue hobby projects or academic interests. In my case, it provided the foundation for something much more significant. The next morning, I contacted Patricia for an urgent consultation. Over coffee at a cafe far from Meditech's offices, I explained the situation with my salary cut and my suspicions about gender-based discrimination. Before we discuss legal options regarding the salary reduction, Patricia said, spreading my patent documents across the table, Let's review exactly what you own independently. The inventory was impressive even to me. 1. Microvascular repair system. A revolutionary method for repairing damaged blood vessels using nanoscale scaffolding and targeted growth factors. The core technology developed during a hiking trip, when I conceived the biomimetic structure based on spider web patterns, was entirely my own. 2. Neural interface platform. The framework allowing direct communication between electronic devices and the human nervous system. While Meditech used aspects of this in their products, the fundamental architecture was conceived during my grandfather's battle with ALS as I searched for ways to help him communicate. 3. Biodegradable implant matrix. A platform technology for creating medical implants that provide structural support before safely dissolving once natural tissue regenerates. The concept came during a ceramics class I took on weekends, observing how certain clay structures could be designed to disintegrate in controlled patterns. 4. Precision drug delivery system. A method for delivering medications to specific tissues without affecting surrounding areas, reducing side effects dramatically. This was inspired by watching targeted irrigation systems during a vacation to Arizona. Each innovation represented potential applications far beyond Meditech's current products, with market values potentially exceeding anything they currently manufactured. Based on my review, Patricia said, after examining both my patent documentation and employment contract, these patents appear to be legitimately yours. The timestamps, development notes, and lack of company resource utilization create a strong case for independent development. Could Meditech claim ownership despite the contract language? I asked. They could try, but they'd face an uphill battle. Your documentation is meticulous. The real question is, what do you want to do with these patents now? That question led to a strategic pivot I hadn't previously considered. Rather than fighting Meditech over the salary, cut a battle that would be emotionally draining. Even if I won, perhaps, I could leverage my independent patent portfolio for something far more valuable. Over the next week, operating with extreme discretion, I began researching Meditech's competitors in the biomedical device industry. 4 companies stood out as potential partners: Biogen Systems, Neurotech Life Science Innovations, and Genesis Medical. Each had complementary product lines that could benefit enormously from my patented technologies. Working from home under the guise of considering the salary adjustment, I prepared detailed prospectuses for each company, highlighting how my patents could enhance their existing products or open entirely new market segments. Patricia helped me draft confidentiality agreements to protect my intellectual property during preliminary discussions. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Within days, I had scheduled meetings with representatives from all 4 companies, carefully arranged during lunch hours or after work to maintain my cover at Meditech. The first meeting with Dr. James Wilson from Biogen Systems set the tone for what would follow. These neural interface specifications are beyond anything currently on the market, he said, examining my technical documentation. Our research team has been trying to solve this exact problem for years. What would access to this technology be worth to Biogen? I asked directly. Depends on the arrangement. Exclusive licensing, non-exclusive acquisition of the patent outright. I'm considering all options, I replied, having prepared for this negotiation extensively. But I'm particularly interested in licensing arrangements that would allow multiple applications across different medical specialties. By the end of the meeting, Dr. Wilson had outlined a potential licensing structure that would include both upfront payment and ongoing royalties based on products developed using my technology. Similar conversations followed with the other companies, each recognizing the value of different aspects of my patent portfolio. Neurotech was particularly interested in the neural interface platform. Life Science Innovations saw immediate applications for the biodegradable implant matrix. Genesis Medical wanted to integrate my precision drug delivery system into their existing product line. What began as discreet meetings evolved into a sophisticated negotiation strategy. As interest grew, so did the financial offers. Companies began competing against each other, driving up the potential licensing fees. Working with Patricia, I structured the licensing agreements to maximize both immediate and long-term value. Rather than granting exclusive rights to any single company, we created field-of-use licenses that allowed each company to apply the technology in their specific area of expertise without limiting applications in other medical pompen fields. The most challenging aspect was maintaining normalcy at Meditech while these negotiations proceeded. Each day I arrived at my lab on time, continued work on ongoing projects, and interacted with colleagues as usual. No one, not even Dr. Chen, knew about the parallel process unfolding outside office hours. There was one close call when Bradley questioned me about an extended lunch, actually a meeting with Neurotech executives. I explained it as a doctor's appointment, making a mental note to be more careful about timing. As the licensing agreements took shape, I consulted with a financial advisor about the potential value. The numbers were staggering. Across all 4 companies, the combined licensing arrangements would generate approximately $299 million annually, with significant upfront payments as well. The final pieces fell into place just 10 days after my salary reduction meeting. With all 4 licensing agreements secured but not yet announced, I scheduled a meeting with Richard to discuss my decision about the salary adjustment. The stage was set for a confrontation none of them could anticipate. The licensing negotiations proceeded at a pace that surprised even Patricia. Typically, such agreements take months to finalize, but the exceptional value of my patent portfolio, combined with the competitive dynamic between the 4 companies, accelerated the process dramatically. My first substantial meeting was with Biogen Systems, held in a private room at the Boston Harbor Hotel to ensure discretion. Dr. James Wilson brought along their chief technology officer and a patent specialist from their legal department. Your neural interface platform represents a paradigm shift in bioelectronic medicine. Dr. Wilson began displaying genuine excitement rather than negotiation tactics. The precision of the neural mapping, combined with the non-invasive implantation method, solves 2 major hurdles we've faced for years. The Biogen team had prepared detailed questions about implementation compatibility with their existing systems and scaling for production. I walked them through each aspect, drawing from my comprehensive development notes. Most neural interfaces achieve either specificity or stability, but not both, I explained, displaying the microscopic electrode array design. Mine achieves both by mimicking the body's own neural architecture rather than imposing an artificial grid pattern. By meeting's end, they presented an initial offer $18 million up front, plus a 7% royalty on all products utilizing the technology. A substantial figure, but my research suggested it undervalued the patent's potential. I appreciate the offer, I responded calmly, but based on market projections for neural interface applications, particularly in chronic pain management and neurodegenerative diseases, I believe 15% would more accurately reflect the RAY technology's value. Their counterproposal of 10% signaled their serious interest. We ended without finalizing terms, but with a clear path forward. Neurotech, my second meeting, approached the negotiations differently. Their CEO, Amanda Richardson, cut through preliminaries with refreshing directness. Hannah, we've analyzed your microvascular repair system patent thoroughly. It's brilliant work. What would exclusive licensing rights cost us? I'm not considering exclusive licensing across all applications, I clarified, but I am open to field-specific exclusivity. This approach, dividing the licensing rights by medical application rather than granting one company complete control, maximized both the technology's impact and my financial return. Neurotech could have exclusive rights for neurological applications, while Biogen could utilize the same technology for cardiac applications, with neither infringing on the other's market. The strategy triggered exactly what Patricia had predicted: competitive escalation. When word circulated discreetly among the 4 companies that others were negotiating for various rights, the offers improved substantially. Life Science Innovations, initially hesitant about the biodegradable implant matrix's manufacturing complexity, revised their position after their technical team conducted a more thorough analysis. Our initial concerns about scalability were unfounded, their chief scientific officer admitted during our third meeting. Your production methodology is actually more efficient than our current processes. We're prepared to offer $22 million upfront plus 12% of gross revenue for orthopedic applications. Each negotiation built upon the previous ones, creating a complex web of licensing arrangements across different medical specialties. The structure required careful legal navigation to ensure no conflicts or overlapping rights, but Patricia masterfully crafted agreements that protected everyone's interests while maximizing the technology's reach. Genesis Medical, the last company to enter serious negotiations, proved the most aggressive in their pursuit. Their research division had been struggling with drug delivery precision for their cancer treatment platforms, and my system offered an immediate solution to problems that had consumed years of their R&D efforts. Rather than a traditional licensing arrangement, their CEO proposed, "We'd like to discuss a strategic partnership that would include ongoing collaboration on future developments." This offer, combining substantial upfront payment with ongoing research funding and higher royalty percentages, became the template for renegotiating with the other three companies. By playing the companies against each other without being manipulative, I created a competitive environment that drove valuations upward naturally. Throughout these negotiations, I maintained my regular schedule at Meditech, compartmentalizing my professional life with discipline that surprised even me. Mornings and afternoons were devoted to ongoing company projects. Evenings and early mornings focused on finalizing the licensing agreements. The stress was immense, but balanced by the growing certainty that I was securing my future on my own terms. The due diligence process was particularly challenging. Each company dispatched technical teams to verify my patent's claims, requiring detailed demonstrations and documentation. Since I couldn't use Meditech facilities for these validations, I arranged access to laboratory space at my alma mater during weekend hours, presenting the work as guest lectures for graduate students while actually conducting verification tests for potential licensees. By the second week of negotiations, the financial framework had crystallized into something remarkable across all four companies. The licensing agreements would generate approximately $299 million annually, with nearly $70 million in upfront payments. The final figures exceeded even Patricia's optimistic projections. "You've essentially created your own biomedical empire without manufacturing a single product," she observed as we reviewed the consolidated agreements. "These companies will develop and market the products while you collect the licensing fees." The most satisfying aspect wasn't the money, though the financial security was certainly welcome. It was the validation, the unequivocal confirmation that my innovations held tremendous value, recognized by the industry's leading companies. After years of having my contributions minimized, and now my compensation slashed at Meditech, this acknowledgement of my worth was profoundly vindicating. As the agreements moved toward finalization, I consulted with a financial advisor and tax specialist to structure the incoming funds optimally. We established a dedicated entity, Hana Biomedical Innovations LLC, to receive the licensing payments and manage the intellectual property. With my financial future secured beyond anything I could have imagined weeks earlier, I turned my attention to the inevitable confrontation with Richard and Meditech. Patricia helped me prepare a meticulous exit strategy, including a formal resignation letter and detailed documentation regarding the independent development of my patented technologies. "They'll likely try to claim ownership of everything," Patricia warned. "Be prepared for threats of litigation, attempts to invalidate your patents, and personal attacks on your professionalism." "I've prepared for that," I assured her, presenting a comprehensive timeline of each innovation's development, complete with witnesses who could testify to my independent work and documentation, proving no company resources were utilizadas. We also prepared financial projections, demonstrating Meditech's dependency on my innovations for their future growth. The 4 products I had developed for them represented 62% of their projected revenue for the coming fiscal year. My departure, particularly if it became contentious, could significantly impact their market position and stock value. This information is your insurance policy, Patricia noted. Not for leverage to stay at Meditech, but to ensure they don't attempt to obstruct your exit. By the end of the second week after my salary reduction meeting, all 4 licensing agreements were secured with signed letters of intent. The formal contracts would require another week for final legal review, but the essential terms were locked in. My independent patent portfolio, developed quietly over years of nights and weekends, was now poised to generate nearly $300 million annually. With everything in place, I scheduled the meeting that would change everything: my official response to Richard regarding the salary reduction. The calendar invitation specified Wednesday at 10 in the morning, a deliberate choice to maximize visibility within the company and give me the full day to complete necessary transitions. The night before the meeting, I prepared a simple leather portfolio containing 3 documents: my formal resignation letter, a summary of my patent portfolio with licensing agreements and financial projections showing Meditech's AT.Q dependency on my innovations. I slept surprisingly well, the anxiety of recent weeks replaced by clarity and resolve. The stage was set. Richard Blackwell, who had slashed my salary by 37% while claiming everyone needs to tighten their belts, was about to discover just how drastically he had miscalculated. Wednesday morning arrived with unusual clarity. The Boston skyline was crisp against a cloudless October sky as I dressed with deliberate care, a charcoal gray suit that conveyed seriousness without aggression, accented with a silk scarf in deep blue that had been a gift from Dr. Chen on my last work anniversary, professional armor for a professional battle. The leather portfolio containing my resignation and supporting documents sat on my kitchen counter while I sipped my coffee, mentally rehearsing the conversation to come. Not out of nervousness, but to ensure I maintained the precise tone I wanted: calm, factual, unassailable. Meditech's lobby bustled with its usual morning activity as I passed through security for what I knew would be one of the last times. Several colleagues greeted me, unaware of the seismic shift about to occur. I returned their greetings with genuine warmth. My issue was with leadership, not with the dedicated scientists and engineers who had been my collaborators. Arriving at my lab, I spent an hour organizing research notes and ensuring my team had clear direction for ongoing projects. Whatever happened with Richard, I wanted to leave my scientific work in order. My assistant Taylor noticed something was different, but didn't press when I mentioned having an important meeting with Richard. At 9:55, I gathered my portfolio and walked deliberately to the executive floor. Richard's assistant Marjorie had worked at Meditech since its founding days. The slight nod she gave me suggested she knew more about the recent salary cuts than she could officially acknowledge. "He's expecting you," she said, gesturing toward the door. "Bradley is with him." The unexpected presence of the CFO altered my mental calculus slightly, but didn't change the fundamentals. In fact, having both of them witness what was about to unfold might prove advantageous. Richard's corner office featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Charles River, furnished with the understated luxury that signaled corporate success without ostentation. He sat behind his massive desk of dark walnut Bradley in one of the visitor chairs, both men looking up from what appeared to be financial projections as I entered. "Hannah, thank you for coming," Richard began with practiced cordiality. "Please have a seat. I understand you've had time to consider our compensation adjustment." I settled into the remaining visitor chair, placing my portfolio on my lap rather than immediately on his desk. "Yes, I've given it considerable thought. I hope you understand that these measures are temporary." Richard continued his tone, suggesting he was delivering good news. "Once market conditions improve, we can revisit compensation structures." "Market conditions?" I raised an eyebrow. Meditech's stock price is at an all-time high, and the quarterly earnings report showed 18% growth, primarily driven by products my team developed. Bradley shifted uncomfortably. The biomedical device sector faces increasing regulatory pressures and competition from overseas manufacturers. We're making proactive adjustments to maintain competitiveness. Interesting, I replied. And these proactive adjustments, do they apply equally across all departments? The momentary silence confirmed what I already knew. Richard leaned forward, adopting his mentorship pose that had once seemed genuine, but now rang hollow. Hannah, I know the adjustment feels significant, but we value your contributions enormously. This isn't about your worth to the company. Isn't it? I asked, simply. Because reducing my salary by 37%, while male colleagues at the same level maintain their compensation, certainly sends a message about how the company values my contribution. That's not an accurate characterization of Bradley began, but I interrupted something I rarely did in professional settings. I've spoken with 6 other department heads, I stated calmly. The pattern is clear. Female leaders saw cuts between 28 and 37%. Male leaders saw either no reduction or nominal adjustments of 5 to 8%. That's not budget management. That's gender-based discrimination. Richard's expression tightened. We can discuss the specifics of how adjustments were determined, but I assure you there was no discriminatory intent. Intent is less relevant than impact, I countered. But actually, I didn't come here to debate the legality of your compensation practices, though I'm sure the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission would find that conversation interesting. Then why did you request this meeting? Richard asked, his patience visibly thinning. The moment had arrived. I opened my portfolio and removed the first document, my resignation letter printed on high-quality stationery, and slid it across the polished desktop. I'm here to inform you that I'm declining the adjusted compensation package by resigning from Meditech effective immediately. Richard glanced at the letter without picking it up, his expression betraying no particular concern. Perhaps he had anticipated this outcome, or perhaps he simply didn't view my departure as significant. That's unfortunate, he said after a moment. We would have preferred to retain you, but I understand this is a personal decision. Our HR department will process your exit paperwork. His dismissive response suggested he believed I was making an emotional decision. I would soon regret that I had no real alternatives, and might even come back seeking reinstatement once reality set in. Before we conclude, I continued maintaining the same professional tone. There are some additional matters you should be aware of regarding intellectual property. This captured both men's attention. Bradley's posture stiffened noticeably. All intellectual property developed during your employment belongs to Meditech, as specified in your contract, he stated automatically. Indeed, all intellectual property developed using company resources or during company time belongs to Meditech, I agreed, emphasizing the qualifying conditions. However, Section 12.3, Paragraph 4 of that same contract acknowledges that independent research conducted outside company time and without company resources remains the intellectual property of the employee. I removed the second document from my portfolio, the summary of my patent portfolio, with licensing agreements, and placed it beside my resignation letter. This is a summary of patents I hold independently developed entirely on my own time, without using Meditech resources. As you'll see, these patents cover several fundamental technologies in biomedical engineering. Richard picked up the document, his expression changing subtly as he scanned the first page. Bradley leaned over to view it simultaneously, his face betraying growing alarm. These technologies appear similar to work you've done at Meditech, Richard said, carefully legal implications clearly running through his mind. Similar applications, entirely different foundational technologies, I clarified. My independent work often inspired solutions to Meditech challenges, but the core patents remain separate from company products. Bradley flipped to the second page, where the licensing agreements were summarized. His face paled visibly. "You've been negotiating with our competitors?" he asked, voice rising slightly. I've been licensing my independently owned intellectual property to companies interested in its applications I corrected, as is my right as the patent holder. Richard had reached the financial summary page, where the total value of the licensing arrangements was itemized approximately $299 million in annual licensing fees across 4 companies, plus significant upfront payments. For the first time since I'd known him, Richard Blackwell appeared genuinely speechless. "This is a breach of your non-compete agreement," Bradley declared, attempting to regain control of the conversation. "My non-compete prevents me from working directly for competing companies in similar roles," I responded, having thoroughly reviewed this with Patricia. "It does not prevent me from licensing independently developed intellectual property." My attorney confirmed this interpretation before proceeding. I placed the third document on the desk, the financial projections showing Meditech's dependency on innovations I had developed for them while employed. "You should also be aware that the 4 products I developed for Meditech, the Neuropulse, CardioFlow, Osteofusion, and HemoGuard, remain company property. However, my departure will impact ongoing development and future iterations. This projection shows their contribution to company revenue over the next 5 years." The implications were clear without being stated explicitly. Meditech would keep the products I had already developed for them, but future innovations would flow through my new licensing arrangements with their competitors. Richard's composure cracked further. "Hannah, surely we can discuss this. If the compensation adjustment is the issue, we can revisit those numbers immediately." The offer to restore my salary, or perhaps even increase it, came exactly as Patricia had predicted, but it was far too late. "My decision isn't about the salary reduction specifically," I explained. "It's about recognizing where I'm valued appropriately and where I'm not. These licensing arrangements represent the market's true assessment of my contribution to medical technology." Bradley was already on his phone, presumably texting the legal department. "We'll need to review all patent filings and documentation immediately." Of course, I agreed. "My attorney has prepared complete documentation demonstrating independent development, including time-stamped notebooks, witnesses who can attest to my work outside company hours, and clear differentiation from Meditech's proprietary technologies. We anticipated your concerns." Richard's face had transformed from shock to calculation. I could almost see him reassessing me, no longer the brilliant but exploitable researcher, but a formidable business adversary who had outmaneuvered him completely. "What exactly are you hoping to achieve with this?" he asked, his tone now one of cautious respect. "Nothing beyond what I've already secured," I replied honestly. "I'm not here to negotiate a better position or extract concessions. I'm simply informing you of my resignation and ensuring clarity regarding intellectual property rights to prevent future misunderstandings." The door opened without a knock, and Marjorie appeared. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but legal says they need to join this meeting immediately." Richard nodded, then turned back to me. "Hannah, I think we should continue this discussion with our attorneys present. There are clearly complex issues to resolve." "There's nothing more to resolve from my perspective," I stated, standing and collecting my copies of the documents. "My resignation is effective immediately. I've already transferred all ongoing project documentation to Dr. Chen and cleared my personal items from the lab. Legal can direct any questions to Patricia Winters at Winters & Associates." As I moved toward the door, Richard made one last attempt. "At least consider a counteroffer. Whatever they're paying you, we can." I turned back, meeting his gaze directly. "They're not paying me, Richard. They're licensing my technology. The distinction matters because one recognizes ownership and the other assumes control. That's something Meditech never quite understood." With that, I left the office, passing the company's legal team, hurrying in the opposite direction. Their urgent expressions confirmed what I already knew. Meditech was about to spend considerable resources investigating whether they could challenge my patents, only to discover that my documentation was impeccable. As I waited for the elevator, Dr. Chen appeared beside me, her expression questioning. I nodded once, confirming without words that I had done it. "Conference room B," In 10 minutes, she asked quietly. I'll be there. I had one more piece of business to complete before leaving Meditech for good, ensuring that those who had supported me understood what had happened and what might come next. News travels with remarkable speed in specialized industries. By that afternoon, whispers of my resignation had already reached competing firms. By evening, speculation about the circumstances had spread throughout Boston's biomedical community. By the following morning, Meditech stock had dropped 11% on rumors of intellectual property disputes and key personnel departures. I watched these developments from the peaceful distance of my apartment, deliberately taking 3 days completely offline. No email, no phone calls, no industry news. This buffer allowed the initial chaos to settle and gave me space to process the monumental change in my professional circumstances. When I finally reconnected, my inbox contained over 200 messages, ranging from former colleagues seeking clarity to industry publications, requesting interviews, to executive recruiters suddenly discovering my unique potential. Most significantly, there were personal notes from team members I had mentored expressing both support and concern about their own futures at Meditech. The meeting with Dr. Chen and several trusted colleagues in Conference Room B immediately after my resignation had been brief but important. I explained my decision without detailing the licensing arrangements, emphasized that I harbored no ill will toward the research teams, and offered to provide references for anyone who chose to seek opportunities elsewhere. They underestimated you spectacularly, Dr. Chen had said as we parted, her expression mixing pride with something like regret. I should have done what you did years ago. 1 week after my resignation, Patricia arranged a conference call with representatives from all 4 licensee companies to finalize implementation timelines. The call revealed that news of my departure from Meditech had accelerated their product development plans, each company eager to be first to market with technologies incorporating my innovations. We've allocated additional resources to the neural interface integration, Dr. Wilson from Biogen reported. Our timeline has advanced from 18 months to approximately 12 for the first clinical applications. Similar reports from the other companies confirmed that my patents would reach patients faster than would have been possible at Meditech, where bureaucracy increasingly slowed innovation. This knowledge provided personal validation. Beyond the financial aspects, my work would improve medical care more quickly and comprehensively through these multiple channels than through a single company. The industry publication MedTech Today requested an interview, which after consideration, I agreed to, with specific parameters. The resulting cover story, Innovation Ownership and Equity How. One engineer rewrote the rules, focused on the broader implications for intellectual property in corporate environments, rather than the specific details of my departure from Meditech. The article included a statement from Richard that struck me as particularly revealing. Meditech continues to value breakthrough innovation and the contributions of all our research staff. We wish Dr. Hannah success in her future endeavors. The formal doctor he had rarely used when I worked there suggested a new distant respect. What the article didn't mention were the increasingly desperate attempts by Meditech to schedule meetings with me. Richard had called personally 4 times. Bradley had sent formal letters requesting good faith discussions regarding technological transition. The company's legal team had contacted Patricia with various proposed agreements, each offering more favorable terms than the last. I instructed Patricia to respond consistently. I had no interest in renegotiating my relationship with Meditech beyond ensuring they respected the boundaries of my intellectual property rights. 3 weeks after my resignation, Dr. Chen called with significant news. There's been a leadership shakeup. The board called an emergency meeting yesterday after the quarterly projections were presented. Let me guess, I replied. The projections showed significant challenges without access to next-generation technologies. Exactly. Plus, someone leaked documentation about the gender-based pattern in salary reductions, and 2 board members went ballistic about the potential liability. Richard has been placed on administrative leave pending review. Bradley's out completely. The information brought less satisfaction than I might have expected months earlier. My focus had shifted entirely to building something new, rather than witnessing the consequences of Meditech's mistakes. Those consequences continued to unfold nonetheless. 4 senior researchers resigned in the following weeks. A class action lawsuit regarding gender-based compensation practices was filed by former employees. The stock price fell another 17% after a major client delayed a purchasing agreement, citing concerns about Meditech's future innovation pipeline. Meanwhile, I channeled my energy into establishing Hana Medical Innovations as a legitimate research entity rather than simply a holding company for patents. Using a portion of the upfront licensing payments, I leased laboratory space in Cambridge and began recruiting a small elite research team focused on next-generation medical technologies. My first hire was Samantha Rodriguez, a brilliant biomedical engineer who had been consistently overlooked for promotion at her previous company, despite her groundbreaking work in tissue regeneration. My second was Dr. Marcus Lee, who had recently completed his postdoctoral research at MIT and brought expertise in computational modeling of biological systems. I was planning to join Meditech until I read about what happened with you, he told me during his interview. It made me reconsider what kind of research environment would truly value innovation. By the 2-month mark after my resignation, Hana Medical Innovations employed 12 researchers, each selected not just for their technical brilliance, but for their collaborative approach and ethical commitment to advancing patient care. Our focus wasn't on generating products for immediate commercialization, but on developing platform technologies that could transform multiple areas of medicine simultaneously. The licensing revenue made this approach possible. Rather than chasing quarterly profits, we could pursue longer-term research directions with potentially greater impact. This freedom attracted talent that might otherwise have been hesitant to join a startup. My first public appearance as CEO of Hana Medical Innovations came at the International Biomedical Engineering Symposium in San Francisco. Standing at the podium before hundreds of industry leaders, many of whom had previously known me only as a Meditech researcher, I presented our vision for collaborative innovation that transcended traditional corporate boundaries. The future of medical technology doesn't lie in siloed research or restrictive intellectual property practices, I argued. It lies in creating fundamental advances that can be implemented across multiple platforms to reach as many patients as possible, as quickly as possible. The response was overwhelming. A standing ovation followed by a flood of researchers, executives, and investors, eager to discuss potential collaborations. Among them was Richard Blackwell, looking noticeably more haggard than when I'd last seen him 2 months earlier. "You've created quite a stir in the industry," he said, approaching me at the post-presentation reception. "That wasn't my primary objective," I replied neutrally. "What was your primary objective?" he asked, seeming genuinely curious rather than confrontational. I considered the question carefully, creating an environment where innovation is valued appropriately, both the innovation itself and the innovators who create it. He nodded slowly. "The board is conducting a comprehensive review of our compensation practices and research management. I'd value your input as a consultant." The irony was almost too perfect. "I'm afraid my schedule is quite full with building my own company," I responded. "But I'm happy to recommend several excellent consultants who specialize in gender equity in STEM fields." As Richard walked away, Dr. Chen appeared at my elbow. "That looked interesting," she observed. "Job offer essentially," I explained, "consulting on the mess they created." She laughed. "Classic. By the way, I gave notice yesterday. 2 other department heads did as well." "Where are you headed?" I asked, though I had a strong suspicion. Neurotech offered me a research director position with a 50% salary increase over my original Meditech compensation, specifically to work with the technologies you licensed them. The pieces were falling into place across the industry. My former colleagues were finding new opportunities with appropriate compensation. The licensee companies were accelerating innovation using my technologies. Meditech was facing the consequences of their short-sighted decisions. And I was building something entirely new, a research organization structured around valuing both innovation and innovators equally. 6 months after my resignation, Hanna Medical Innovations announced our first major breakthrough, an artificial tissue matrix that could be customized to match individual patients' cellular structures, dramatically reducing rejection risks in transplant procedures. The technology built upon my earlier patents but represented an entirely new direction made possible by our collaborative research model. The announcement triggered another round of industry attention, including a feature in the Wall Street Journal profiling the research exodus from traditional corporations to more equitable startups and the resulting acceleration in medical innovation. The article included a telling statistic in the 6 months since my departure and the subsequent leadership changes. Meditech had not filed a single new significant patent, while their competitors collectively filed 27. Many filed, incorporating technologies I had licensed them. My father, whose early guidance on intellectual property had made all this possible, summed it up best during our weekly phone call. They thought they were buying your time with that salary. They never understood they needed to respect your mind. That respect for myself and for others became the foundation of everything I built next. 1 year after the day, Richard and Bradley informed me of my 37% salary reduction. I stood in the atrium of Hanna Medical Innovations' new research facility. Sunlight streamed through the glass ceiling, illuminating the space where 68 researchers and support staff now worked on technologies that promised to transform multiple areas of medicine. The contrast with my former situation couldn't have been more striking. Where Meditech had increasingly prioritized short-term profit over innovation, our organization maintained a singular focus on breakthrough technologies that addressed critical medical challenges. Where they had created tiered compensation systems that undervalued certain employees, we implemented transparent salary bands based solely on contribution and expertise, regardless of gender background or negotiation skill. The financial results spoke for themselves. Our licensing agreements now generated $328 million, annually exceeding initial projections. More importantly, technologies bearing my patents had entered clinical use through our licensee partners, already improving outcomes for patients with conditions ranging from chronic pain to vascular disorders. My personal transformation had been equally profound. The researcher who once accepted being undervalued had become a respected industry leader who set new standards for innovation management. Industry publications regularly sought my perspective on topics ranging from intellectual property strategies to creating equitable research environments. Universities invited me to speak about entrepreneurship and women in STEM fields. Most satisfying was the culture we'd built at Hanna Medical Innovations. Researchers were encouraged to maintain clear boundaries between company projects and personal intellectual development. We explicitly recognized the value of ideas generated during off hours, creating a profit-sharing model for employees whose independent innovations aligned with company interests rather than automatically claiming ownership. We're not just researching new medical technologies, I often told new hires. We're researching new ways to structure innovation itself. This approach attracted extraordinary talent, including several former Meditech researchers who brought valuable expertise and a shared commitment to our vision. Dr. Chen had declined my offer to join as Chief Scientific Officer, preferring her new role at Neurotech, but served as a trusted advisor and collaboration partner. Meditech itself had undergone dramatic changes. Richard Blackwell had been permanently removed as CEO after the board's investigation revealed systematic discrimination in compensation practices. The class action lawsuit filed by former female employees had settled for a substantial sum, forcing meaningful policy changes throughout the organization. Most surprising was the communication I received 6 months after my departure, a formal partnership proposal from Meditech's interim leadership team. They sought to license specific technologies from Hanna Medical Innovations to complement their existing product lines. After careful consideration and consultation with my executive team, I agreed to limited collaboration under specific conditions, complete transparency in how our technologies would be implemented, fair compensation that recognized their true value, and Meditech's commitment to maintaining equitable practices going forward. The partnership limited, though, it was represented something important, not personal vindication, but evidence that systems can change when their flaws are exposed decisively enough. The company that had once devalued my contribution now approached as an equal seeking mutually beneficial collaboration rather than exploitation. Throughout this extraordinary year, I had maintained detailed journals documenting the journey. These notes formed the foundation for a more formal collection of insights I now shared with mentees and colleagues facing similar challenges. First, documentation is protection. My meticulous record-keeping regarding when and where I developed innovations had made the difference between vulnerability and empowerment. In professional environments, where contribution may be undervalued or appropriated, clear documentation establishes boundaries and ownership. Second, know the specifics of your employment agreement. Most workers sign contracts without fully understanding the implications, particularly regarding intellectual property. The clause acknowledging that independent research remained my property had been standard legal language, but recognizing its significance had transformed my options. Third, your value exists independent of others' assessment. When Meditech slashed my salary, they were expressing their valuation of my contribution, but that valuation was fundamentally flawed. The market ultimately provided a more accurate assessment, hundreds of millions, versus $72,000 annually. Fourth, timing matters in addressing inequity. Had I reacted emotionally and immediately to the salary reduction, I might have sacrificed leverage. The strategic patience to fully develop alternatives before taking action had maximized my options and minimized Meditech's ability to obstruct my exit. Fifth, gender-based undervaluation remains pervasive but not invincible. The pattern of disproportionate salary reductions for female department heads reflected systemic biases that persist throughout industries. However, the consequences Meditech faced, from legal action to talent exodus to stock devaluation, demonstrated that such discrimination increasingly carries significant costs. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, true innovation requires both freedom and respect. The collaborative, boundary-respecting environment we created at Hana Medical Innovations produced more breakthrough technologies in 1 year than my entire tenure at Meditech, precisely because researchers felt valued, protected, and empowered. These lessons extended beyond my personal experience to influence broader conversations about innovation, intellectual property, and equity in technical fields. The story of my departure from Meditech and subsequent success had become something of a case study in both what to do and what not to do when managing technical talent. Several women in biomedical engineering and other STEM fields contacted me to share similar experiences and ask for guidance. In response, I established a formal mentorship program connecting experienced innovators with emerging talents, particularly those from backgrounds traditionally underrepresented in technical leadership. 1 year to the day after my resignation, I received an unexpected email from Bradley Cooper, the former CFO, whose cost-cutting had triggered my departure. "I've followed your success with interest," he wrote. "While we clearly had different perspectives on valuation, I must acknowledge that the market has decisively supported your assessment. I'm writing not to reopen old wounds, but to share that your example has caused me to reconsider certain fundamental assumptions about how technical contribution should be valued. The company I now advise has implemented several policies directly influenced by the lessons of Meditech's mistakes with you and others." The message required no response, but served as a fitting bookend to the experience evidence that systems can change when their failures become too costly to ignore. Standing in the atrium of the research facility that bore my name, watching brilliant minds collaborate on technologies that would help countless patients, I reflected on the narrow view of value that had once constrained my potential. The salary reduction that had seemed catastrophic had actually been the catalyst for something far more important than financial compensation. It had forced me to recognize and assert my true worth. For anyone watching who has ever had their contribution diminished, their innovation undervalued, or their compensation reduced, while others remained whole, know that such moments can become unexpected turning points. The question isn't whether you're being valued appropriately, but whether you recognize your true worth clearly enough to insist upon it. Have you ever faced a situation where your work was undervalued? How did you respond, and what would you do differently now? Share your experience in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button if this story resonated with you. If you know someone facing similar challenges in their career, please share this video. Sometimes seeing another's journey can illuminate the path forward. Thank you for watching, and remember that knowing your true value changes everything about how you navigate both challenges and opportunities.